So I'm going to also grant permission to Westwood Media Center to record the meeting, and I will ask the question, does anybody else want to record the meeting? Okay. I will, if we were in person, I would look across the room and welcome all the participants who are sitting in the audience. But what we will do is, as they come and make their presentations, we will recognize them and thank them for attending, because we have some of the more senior officials and staff in town coming before us tonight. Just a quick couple of comments on process. Everybody on the Finance Commission has received the presentation. So what I request is, and hopefully you've had a chance to go through them, but wait till the end of each presentation before we ask our questions. And then Chris Pareda will be carefully make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask any questions they have. And then we will also allow for public questions, and we have a process to allow those people to join us as a participant. And then just one request, try and use the little yellow hand, the little icon to raise your hand if you want to speak, and then Chris will watch that. If for any reason you can't do it or something doesn't work, just wave your hand, and I'm sure Chris will notify that too. So with that, I would ask Victoria to go through a roll call since we are on Zoom.
It's working.
Victoria, are you muted?
I'm here.
Okay.
Bill Bruce.
Here.
John Kerry.
Here.
Jim Ferrero.
Here.
Renee Gaultier.
Here.
Mike Gay.
Here.
George Hertz.
Here.
Angela Hughes.
She's here.
She's here.
I saw her name. Caitlin Jersek.
Here.
George Leham.
Here.
George Maroon.
Here.
Christina Patijewicz.
Here.
Chris Pareda.
Here.
Sean Weller.
Here.
And Alex Yale.
Here.
Okay.
Okay, well, once again, welcome everybody to our first Zoom meeting. Hopefully the next one we will attempt to do in person. One thing we did hear very loud and clear is we will make a Herculean effort to at least make sure that the voting meetings at the end of our work period, those two sessions will clearly need to be in person. I think that was a very strong desire of the Finance and Warrant Commission. So with that, I would ask everybody to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I will start it. I pledge allegiance
To the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which he
which it
stands.
stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I guess if we now would kindly bring in the, I believe it's going to be Chairman Gotti, Town Administrator, Mr. Coleman, and I know that Town Council Pat Ahern will be joining at a certain point in time, but I also think Pam Dukeman is going to be able to join us too. So if we can bring those people in, that would be wonderful. I see Mr. Gotti, I see Mr. Coleman. And I think I saw Ms. Dukeman's name pop up, which is still very delightful to see, even though we will not be seeing Ms. Dukeman's name pop up after October 22nd. So at the beginning, I will once again thank her for her tremendous service to the town. She's just been a wonderful person for me to work with and learn from. And I think, Mr. Gotti, if I'm correct, the town council will be joining you a little later.
Pat is actually trying to monitor. He may be in the audience, and
Okay.
he's also, this may be one of the busiest nights in town history. I think there are at least a half a dozen different meetings that are going on. And, you know, as is the case, oftentimes you have many people on different things. So we're trying to divide and conquer as best we can. But as you said, we're fortunate to have both Chris and Pam here with us tonight.
Well, welcome. If you would like to start your presentation, it would be most appreciated.
I certainly would. Hello to everyone, and thank you for having us here tonight. I know many of you, but not all of you. I was looking forward to meeting you in person. For those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I'm going to go full screen here. Let me know if in fact you can see the screen and if you are seeing it.
It is
We're
full
good.
screen.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to give, I know you have a packed agenda. We're going to keep it relatively high level and brief. I'm going to give a quick state of the town and some of the highlights that are going on. We'll give a budget update. We'll talk a little bit about the 5-year capital planning. We'll talk about the reconstitution of the Long Range Financial Planning Committee. We'll talk about the next steps and timing relative to the build of the fiscal year 24 budget. And then we'll leave some time for questions. Does that sound like a good plan, George?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All right, so just briefly, the state of the town is really strong. We have, we're in excellent financial position, and we've got some tremendous budget management in place. We got through the pandemic without significant financial stress, though we still have people who are, suffering from COVID, and that's why we were all here on Zoom. We also recently had our AAA bond rating reaffirmed as we went out for the borrowing relative to the Hanlon-Deerfield School. A lot of that AAA bond rating is a reflection of our good governance and our good financial policies. Those budgets allow us to maintain excellent town services in the realm of safety, public works, and human services. We know, and you'll hear later from the school committee in terms of our top tier schools. Recently, I saw on one of the ranking sites that Westwood was in one of the top 10 in Massachusetts. I think last year we were ranked as one of the best places to live outside of Boston, and we know homes continue to be in high demand here. Some highlights recently of what's going on in town. We just recently dedicated Wentworth Hall, the Islington Library and Community Center. That was just 2 weeks ago. Same day, we actually broke ground at the Hanlon-Deerfield School. As you continue to see down in Islington, the revitalization of Islington Center, we are welcoming new retail businesses like the Muffin House and Neroli Mercado. And hopefully soon we will be seeing Neroli Restaurant open. And then Obed Baker will be redeveloped now into a multi-use facility, both residential and retail. I want to highlight that we have some real quality personnel. George, you just talked a great deal about Pam, and we will absolutely miss her. But we have many other folks who get recognition, not just from the town, but also at the state and national level. Dottie Powers was this year's Mass Clerk of the Year. Todd Korchin and Brendan Ryan were recognized for the Route 109 projects recently. And Jimmy McCarthy was a National Professional Facilities Manager of the Year. So we have many great folks in place. These are just some of the ones that we have who were recently recognized. Now, as you alluded to, George, we have some new transition in place. Joan Courtney Marie retired back in June, and we have welcomed Molly Keene as our HR Director and Assistant Town Administrator. We're currently in the process of filling the soon-to-be vacant Finance Director job. I believe, George, you actually had the opportunity to meet with several of the candidates as part of that process. Last night, we appointed Phil Shapiro as a temporary replacement to Jim Gavin, our town treasurer, who resigned after 20 years of service to the town. We are very fortunate to have Phil, who is a CFO by profession, has served on the select board, has served on the board of assessors, is intimately familiar with all that goes on in town. And we welcome him and thank him for his willingness to serve in replacement of Jim. And we are also currently looking for a town planner. Now, I alluded to good governance. Our charter and bylaws lay out the roles, responsibilities, and policies and procedures, and that gets reviewed every 10 years as needed to be updated. And the Charter Review Committee is actually meeting tonight. And I believe they're also meeting next Wednesday as well, the 19th. So that process is ongoing. I know that George and Chris have each had an opportunity to speak with the committee. And I believe that next week, the 19th, is public participation as well. And while every meeting is public, this is the one where they've specifically reserved to get public input on the charter. We just conducted and approved some changes to the financial policies for the town. Just some highlights on those. They require us to have structurally sustainable budgets. We added the fact that the hotel and meals tax shouldn't be used for operating budgets, but for one-time capital projects, which is how we have been using it for the past several years. There's a non-exempt debt policy where that's not to exceed 8% of our general fund revenue. We go through an annual audit by a third party, and the audit committee meets regularly. We have quarterly reporting in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We try to maintain our strong credit rating, and many of these policies and our adherence to them and our strong budget management is what allows us to have the AAA bond rating, which allows us to get very favorable rates when we go out to borrow. We have the reserve fund. We have very good policies regarding the use of free cash. And we added that those policies, all of these policies, be reviewed every 3 years. So at this time, I'm going to let Chris talk about what the overall financial status is relative to the 3 budgets that we have going on. So I'm going to turn it over to him, but I know you, if you have not already received, you will be receiving by tomorrow many of the documents that were presented to us last night. Pam went through a very detailed update on the financial status of the town. We will touch on some of the high-level things related to that, and you will have a lot to see if you look at the documents. And if you have any questions, you can also look at last night's presentation. You'll see that there was extensive commentary from both Pam and Kathy Riley, I believe, who was our OPEB liability expert and actuary who was reporting on that. So with that, I'll turn it to Chris.
Thank you, Rob. So we have, at this time, we're actually operating with 3 different fiscal years. We're closing out fiscal year 22, which ended on June 30th of 22. We are in the process of working with our FY23 budget, and we are kicking off the FY24 budget process. Fiscal year 22, and we have Pam here, so Pam, if I misspeak in any way, please. Fiscal year 22, we have the free cash certification that was completed this fall with the Department of Revenue. There's significant state reporting requirements in the month of October, both with the Department of Revenue as well with the Department of Education. So our financial team is working with the school financial team to make sure that we have all of those requirements completed. The FY22 audit was completed in the fall, and the audit committee meets with the auditors and then report to the select board. So these were all things that have been done to close out fiscal year 22. Overall, we are on target. Our revenue closed out smoothly. We had very good targeted collections for real estate taxes and motor vehicle excise taxes. And although we did experience a drop in our hotels and meals tax during COVID, we are seeing that those revenues are increasing in fiscal year 22 and going forward. Our expenditures, the large ones that we have were closed out smoothly. We have an opportunity with the select board, but also, if you recall, during town meeting, Articles 1 and 2 also can address, particular Article 1 can address matters in the current fiscal year, which would have been fiscal year 22. So we closed that out smoothly. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Sure thing.
Our free cash was recently certified. This year, our balance is a strong $7.7 million. And again, we, just as part of our financial policies, we do not expend all of our free cash. So as you can see, the planned budget base that we use was 3.6. The financial policies target unallocated amount of 3.7. So again, we're not using all the funds, and that's part of the financial policies. It's just, and we do use the free cash for one-time expenditures. As I said, so it's not applied, free cash is not applied to the operating budget. We do not use the full allowance. It's in line with our financial policies. It's used for capital needs, not operating. Again, I want to emphasize that for capital needs, the one-time cost, not the operating cost. And this is, again, an example of the work that you guys are doing, the work your predecessors have done, as well as the select board town meeting, Pam and her team. This has been a great, financially strong fund community. In FY23, And what we did at town meeting, we used $3.8 million of free cash. Majority of that, 2.3, was used for school and municipal capital. We put $125,000 into stabilization. And then again, for one-time costs, we used $1.3 million for town meeting articles, snow and ice, aid to the elderly, and also the purchase of the American Legion building. The FY23 budget process will be completed after we get the approval from DOR on all of our values, including our tax growth. We will have the tax classification hearing will be with the select board on November 7th. We will also have the FY23 tax rate approved by the Department of Revenue, and then we are planning to mail out the FY23 tax bills, the actual bills, on or around January 1st. So it's a happy new year to everyone there. Fiscal year 24 budget process. What we are currently asking our department heads, as well as the school, Emily and her team are asking to do, just like any other year, this is a balancing act. We have a variety of needs, everything from operating budget reserves, tax impact, long-term liabilities, and service levels that we have to balance each and every year. When you go to the tax levy, just as an example, what we're looking at for where we left off from fiscal year 22 of the 86, the tax levy limit of 86.7 million, that got carried forward to the beginning of FY 23. And you can see the circled amounts, what we did tax, what we could tax up to. So we did not tax up to the levy. We have an unused levy amount of 160,000. But again, I just want to bring you back up to the top where you see the estimated new growth of 450 and the estimated University Station new growth of 100,000. If you look to your left between fiscal years 19 and fiscal year 22, we, again, very conservative revenue growth that we put in the budget, and we've exceeded those estimated growth amounts in prior years. So this is, again, once we get that new growth number, that number, that 450 will be updated. I want to emphasize again that the town does not tax to the levy limit. We have not taxed the levy limit, and again, that goes back to the sound financial policies and planning that the community has had in the past, and as we will go forward. Thank you. So as you know, that majority of our revenue comes from real estate taxes or taxes. We have, under the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we have limits of property tax that a town can charge that can increase by 2.5% and by its new growth. The town also may choose to override these limits and have something placed on the ballot for the select board to vote on, as well as the voters. But we have two different, for the Proposition 2.5, the 2.5% growth, the 2.5% increase, and the new growth. The chart that I just showed that we, for FY23, we had that 160. But if we need additional funds, and some communities have, we've been fortunate, we haven't had to go for a general override in some time. That additional money would be, the additional funds would be for any purpose of the operating costs. And that's a permanent increase on the limit. So that would be, so for example, that would be the 2.5%, the new growth, plus that general override. What you recall was what we've done recently is we had a debt exemption. The debt exemption was for the Hanlon-Deerfield school. So that was to pay for capital projects. That's annual debt service that's added to the tax levy. There's no permanent taxes that are added. That is for a specific project. And again, using the financial policies that we have in place, sound financial planning, and supported by the community. A detail of all the town's history, the override history, is included in the budget summary book and also in the annual town meeting warrant book. Proposition 2.5 controls total taxes that the town can raise. It does not apply to an individual tax bill. Again, that's really important to understand. That's to the total taxes the town can raise. It's not applied to individual tax bills. The debt management is within Proposition 2.5. Our financial policies have a maximum of slightly over $8 million per year. However, we're at 3.3. So again, we are not taxing, we're not using the funds to its capacity. The town has been, with its sound financial planning, the town holds a AAA bond rating, which is extremely beneficial when we go out to borrow, and I'll get to that in a minute. Just as far as the 5-year capital plan, every year, Tam and her team have put together a binder with the 5-year capital plan. This is information that's coming in from both town and school. It's a comprehensive review and report. It's anything that's requested gets put into that booklet. That doesn't mean that it all gets funded, but it means that anything that's requested is in that book and you can see. And there have been things that have been on the 5-year capital plan and have been deferred for a variety of reasons. Case in point, the Public Works building, that's been on the 5-year capital plan in year 5 ever since I've been here. It continues to be pushed out to year 5. So those are things that are reviewed annually with the finance team, with the select board, and with those departments. The select board, the school committee will work with their teams to review and prepare the recommended capital budget and present that to FinCom for hopefully for your support and for recommendation to town meeting. The base capital level is been at 2.3 million for maintenance for both town and school buildings and equipment. It can be augmented on an as-needed basis, and we typically, when we need to augment that, we do use free cash. Again, just going over the 5-year capital plan includes ongoing capital purchases, maintenance, and replacement needs. We do get input from department heads. That's where it all starts from with their requests. We have our rotating capital, heavy equipment intensive, and we have police cars. We have, fire vehicles, DPW trucks, building maintenance. Those are some of the things that you'll see in the 5-year capital plan. You also see new structures in the 5-year capital plan as well. Speaking of new structures, some of the major building projects that have been discussed, and I say discussed both by the select board and by the community at large. We have Fire Station 1, we also call that headquarters, the DPW facility, the Sheehan Elementary School, Town Hall, and we do have on the capital plan the senior center expansion, and some other things that we have discussed as a community center for recreation center and some sewer and maintenance facility. Other things that have been discussed as well that could be on the 5-year capital plan. For example, the town community has discussed the Gay Street Sidewalk project as well as Hale Reservation. I'm going to turn it over to Rob so we can share with you information regarding the long-range financial planning.
Thank you, Chris. As we talked about last night at our select board meeting, we are going to reinstate the long-range financial planning committee, and that is a committee that existed for a number of years before 2019, and it's going to have representatives from key boards and departments, the select board, the school committee, planning board, the board of assessors, the town administrator, the tax collector, the treasurer, the Department of Economic Development, others from within the town and school administration. And I know this was one that was discussed with the Charter Review Committee in terms of being able to have FinCom members be able to serve in some capacity. And so I know that there is some discussion going on amongst the Charter Review Committee to make that a possibility as well. And really the mission is we want to be able to focus on a number of those long-term financial concerns and have this group be able to advise on some of the prioritization and have that happen on sort of a quarterly basis. You'll also see that we have some at-large community members. Each of the 3 select board members put forward a couple of names. We will be hopefully finalizing those at our next meeting on October 24th, and then making appointments either at that meeting or our meeting in November. So there will be ample opportunity for that group to provide some perspective to FinCom as those discussions go. They're really, given the long-term nature of these things, there isn't a need to meet monthly. Quarterly will be adequate, but it's the type of thing where this is sort of plan the work and work the plan. So, Chris, you want to touch on just the sort of next steps as it relates to the fiscal year 24 budget development?
Sure. So as far as next steps, as I mentioned earlier, the tax classification hearing will be on November 7th with the select board. November through February, the select board meetings will continue to update them on the FY24 revenue projections, including local revenue sources, state budget, which may have some delay given what's happening with the election. To continue with the capital planning, the articles with select board, ongoing annual capital, the timing of large projects to be considered, as well as other municipal budget requests. We'll have the base budget and any requests for new positions and programs that we'll receive from members of the team, both town and school. In addition to that, we'll also be discussing the FY24 aid. Governor's budget typically is at the end of January. Usually we receive information when we attend the MMA annual meeting. With the new governor, as I was alluding to earlier, that new governor will have a 5-week extension. So we may not receive that information as we have in years past, but we'll go more once the new governor takes office. The select board will propose a budget document on February 1st per the charter. Municipal budget document, the overall budget summary, capital budget articles, and present the FY24 budget to you in February of 23.
And as Chris was alluding to with respect to the state aid, with that extra 5 weeks that the governor gets, we will take a conservative view on state aid and hold it relatively flat. We've had a nice stable run of reliable state aid for a number of years now, but you don't have to look too far in the distant past to see where there were some peaks and valleys where that might change and fluctuate. So with the transition that will happen with this election, we will take a conservative view on state aid and what gets presented to you in February. And that is the sort of high level. I would encourage you to watch last night's select board meeting. We went into much deeper detail with respect to things like OPEB liability funding and many other things. So if you have any questions, we would entertain them now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, George.
Okay, good. Okay, so the process we talked about is if you have questions, please raise your hand. Do we have any questions from any members of the Finance and Warrant Commission?
Yeah, George Maroon.
First of all, thanks for all the info, folks. Chris, Rob, appreciate the presentation. First question is the affirmation of the AAA bond rating. Was that done before or after the debt issuance in August? I see 54 million odd was raised in August.
That was done as part of the debt issuance.
So it was with the knowledge that the issuance was going to take place.
Correct.
Great. That's terrific. And then second quick question. I saw the free cash flow chart. Is that, do you manage to a target, maybe perhaps a percentage of the expected budget or, percentage of debt service or something like that? Is there a target that you use to do you seek out a target when you because I see that it's increasing and I'm just wondering if it's increasing towards some end goal.
So I will ask Pam to fill in the detail on that. As it does grow as the budget grows each year. So you saw that I think this past year for fiscal 23, if memory serves, there was a total free cash number of 7.7, 3.6 of which was being allocated as base for capital. And that when you ask about a target, there is roughly historically been some turn back each year that the different departments, as things maybe go unutilized or things come in cheaper than originally had been planned. I think, Pam, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that has run at about just under 2 or around 2%.
Yeah, but if I can just add, the free cash as a policy is a percent of our general fund operating budget net of debt service. So as that budget goes up, the dollar amount of the free cash goes up. So you do see that amount rise, but it is a percent, and we remain within level of the percent. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Ferraro.
Yeah, thank you. Can you give us any insight into some potential warrant articles that we may be facing this year?
It's probably a little too early to talk about those, Jim. You heard Chris allude to Hale. There have been conversations that have been ongoing with Hale. We may reserve something, but there's nothing that is in a place where that would be on an article at this time. And I will commit to you that before anything is brought to town meeting, that there will be adequate public discussion of such an article. Quite frankly, I like to, I want to see that as in the discussion with all of the other items that the long-term financial planning committee will be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, Hale's been kicking around for almost a year now, and nothing's been presented to the FinCom. Can we get any more information on
The
that?
status of the negotiations are ongoing. There's nothing actually to present to FinCom, nothing definitive to present to FinCom.
Not definitive. How about a little inkling of what some of the discussions are? I mean, $10 million is a big budget cut.
And there's nobody has agreed to a $10 million number. So there's nothing definitive to speak to. Honestly, that's their ask. That is not what anybody is committed to. So that is part of what is the ongoing negotiation.
All right, and just one follow-up. Pam, I'd like to thank you very much for all your years of service. I think I'm just beginning to get my head around this now, and to see you go is going to be a big brain drain, but I wish you the best. But before you go, you and I had a conversation last year about one budget item that you said you had put a special sticky note on for the next person. I don't know if you recall that.
I do recall that. No, I made a commitment to you to look at that. So Jim had mentioned we fund a FinCom reserve. We're required by state law to do that. It's $405,000 that really is for emergency and unforeseen items. And because our budgets have been structured very well the last several years, we've not had to use that. So you have $405,000. The process would be that the select board would have to come to the FinCom and get transfers from that. We have not done that. Sometimes we do at town meeting use that as a little bit of a funding source for snow and ice. We did last year. But then whatever's not used gets turned back. When Rob was talking about not all the budgets get used, and that gets turned back into free cash. So last year we turned back 265,000. The 3 or 4 years preceding that, we turned back about the whole amount, the 400,000. And Jim was saying, could we fund that account with free cash? So that we're not kind of like continuing to generate more free cash because of that account. And that would be fine. I would say that would be, well within our policies. That's not really an operating budget item that we expect to spend each year. So I would think to use free cash to fund that. So then if you're closing it out, all you've really done is pulled aside some free cash, and then you're just going to release it if you haven't used it. That would be fine. As long, Jim, so I committed to you, you commit to me, that there's not other items that then follow that. Really not using free cash towards operating budget items is just such one of our most important financial policies, and what keeps us kind of, on the narrow going forward. But I do think it would be fine for that one account, particularly because we've not been using it on a regular basis.
Great, thank you. I'll look forward to the next budget. So
Thank
best
you,
wishes to you.
Thank you for your kind words. And I do want to mention, I think Rob and Chris did such a great job. So I feel comfortable my work here is done. They did a beautiful job in presenting that financial overview to you.
And no question about that, but they got a long way to go.
I concur, Jim.
Big shoes to fill on that front, Jim. No argument there.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
George Laham.
Thank you very much, and I definitely echo everybody's thoughts about Pam. I was new on the FinCom, and she was extremely helpful. It's just gonna have big shoes to fill. I have a question for Rob and Chris, and it's more, I guess, conceptual question. It came up at the last FinCom meeting, and I'm going to use the example of the school budget. When the subcommittee reviewed the school budget, while the FinCom is more of an advisory group, and we kind of vet things to look at them to answer questions and see if we support it, it was kind of almost as if a rubber stamp was applied too, because it seems like they were when we asked Emily Parks, about if there wiggle room in the increase, and she had said that there was a meeting that took place earlier in the year, and they were basically told 3.4% is the amount of increase that they were allowed to have, and that came down from the selectmen and the budgeting and the finance. Is there a way that the FinCom can be involved in that process so that, when a budget is proposed to us, it's not just, a rubber stamp, we like it or we don't like it, where we actually have some say in the actual budget and the actual finance?
George, there is, first of all, that meeting is probably something that is a conversation that Pam had as finance director. Pam, feel free to add to this if you like. The reality is the budget is, what is it, 60% the schools. And so there's an allocation of the levy that they are able to go to. They have the right to put forward an operating budget proposal that exceeds that and, pursue an override, an operating general override, as Chris laid out earlier. But that conversation about how does that budget split up amongst, the levy split up amongst the different parts of the way the budget is allocated based on, it's largely personnel. And so that's where it all comes from. That's likely the conversation I think that you're alluding to. But Pam, would that be something you could comment on further?
Well, I do think it's just really that we discuss it with the FinCom when we come in and present the budget overview early to you, as we do with the select board. It's just the reality of, if we live under Prop 2.5, there's only so much new money each year. We have to first pay for any increase in any fixed cost, debt, health insurance, pension obligations, anything like that. And then we just talk in terms of, not that we're guaranteeing this amount or that we have to spend that amount. We do just say what's left can provide for X percent. That's where we're not telling anyone that's what they get or that's what we want to spend, that we don't want to support more or less, but it's the reality. And the reality is it's about a 3% increase. We can project out for years is all we can really cover within a normal budget under the limits of 2.5. So we do know pretty early, is it a year we think we need either because of services or we think we can go to the town and ask for a general override? Now, we just had a large, debt exemption approved by our voters recently. I don't think it would be a year that we're going to go back and say, now we need a general override. So I'm just saying that the fact that we know that, George, we do talk in terms with everybody, our departments, the school, select board, and FinCom. We say, based on that, here's our revenue, here's fixed obligations we know of. In general terms, what does that resulting amount support? So we don't kind of tell them that's all they can ask for. I think they'll confirm that with you. I think you're meeting with them after us, right? I think it's just, well, that's our discussion. We say, because when people hear, well, it goes up 2.5, or you're getting X million in new number, we're just trying to give some parameters to folks on what does that mean.
Yes,
I want to make a few comments here. First of all, I think you have to respect the fact that the school committee is somewhat independent. And I think the reality is that the select board in their policymaking role can allocate a certain percentage of funds available to town to the school. It's up to the school department and the school committee to decide how to spend it. I think in our overview of the school budget, I think the guidance we need to give the town is, after we meet with officials from the school, does it appear that they are spending money in a wise and reasonable way? Is there anything we feel that's missing? So I think to some extent, we're probably doing a bit of a more of advising to the town on how the school department may be spending its money, not how much money the school department gets. That really, in my opinion, George, let me finish, is a policy issue. The second thing I want to raise are a couple of points that came up. And in terms of both the 5-year capital plan and what I'll talk about is the long-range financial planning, Chris Parade and I met with the Charter Commission. And right now, because of the way our charter is written, the Finance and Warrant Commission is not allowed to have a representative on long-range financial planning, even somebody ex officio. We can have a member who sits in and listens, but it's somewhat of just like a regular citizen going. The discussion that Chris, Vice Chairman Chris and myself have had with Mr. Coleman and Mr. Gotti is we are going to request that the chair of the long-range financial planning or commission they set up and another representative come in and meet with some representatives for the Finance and Warrant Commission. Let us know what you're thinking about. Let us know the policies you're looking at changing or getting some guidance on. We will then give you some input. You can take that input and guidance and advice and hopefully use it in your deliberations. So we're trying to come up with a solution until the Finance and Warrant Commission is allowed to formally participate in long-range financial planning. In the capital side, because they mentioned the 5-year capital plan, as soon as the 5-year capital plan is available, it's the book. And I think it comes out in October. And in our discussions with Chairman Gotti, that as soon as they get it, we're going to get a copy of that 5-year capital plan. I would like, especially the members of the Finance and Warrant Commission who we assign to a capital group, I want them to read that document, become completely familiar with it. We have then requested that Mr. Coleman and department heads sit down with our capital group, go through what the town has recommended, and you will then have a chance to ask the department heads, how do they feel about that allocation? So we're trying to come up with a way to get us involved a bit earlier in the process. I think we also have to respect the fact that that the recommendations the town puts forward need to be approved by the select board. And there may be an opportunity, if Mr. Coleman is comfortable, he may be able to come to us earlier with his tentative set of recommendations, or they may decide to wait until the select board fully approves them. But we will look at the capital budget holistically. We will have a chance to meet with department heads. We will have a chance to understand, are their priorities being met, and are they comfortable with the allocation? So that's a little bit of a different, how we're going to solve capital budget, long-range financial planning. And I think you got to look at, I mean, realistically, there is a line between the policy setting role of the select board and our duties as a Finance and Warrant Commission in evaluating, reviewing, and making a recommendation to town meeting. And there's a fine balance we're trying to achieve in working together. So those are my comments on it. I think, Chris, you were next.
George, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I don't want my comment to be misinterpreted where, it's just about the school department. It was more of a comment like when we're reviewing a budget, say we're reviewing the police budget, if we're reviewing things and people in the town had said, oh, we need another police cruiser or we need another fire truck. It's some, or, those may be capital items. We need another lieutenant on the force. It was, is there a mechanism in place where the FinCom actually has more of a something beyond the yes or no to what we're presented? Can we make a recommendation to add something to a budget other than just saying yes or no to the budget? That was more of my comment. I wasn't saying the school committee specifically. So Rob, please don't take it that way. It wasn't, you guys gave a pie and then that was it. I was more saying, is there a way for the FinCom to have more than a yes or no type of role? Or a go and no go. So that's more what I was asking.
Chris Pareda, you want to?
I was going to ask Chris Coleman if you wanted to follow up on any of that.
Chris, not to be wise, any of what?
Okay.
I don't know what you're referring to.
All right. I just have one question, George, and that relates to a couple of people have alluded to borrowing. Have we actually gone out and borrowed money on the Hanlon-Deerfield project?
We sure have, yes. One of the packets we reviewed with the select board last night, we'll send out to you first thing in the morning, is our current debt. It's a whole summary package on our debt. We have borrowed the majority of the funds for the Hanlon-Deerfield School. There's only a little bit remaining that we'll borrow near the end of the project. But we went out this summer and issued a $60 million bond for the construction. We also in the spring issued bonds for the first pieces, the feasibility and the design pieces. So the majority of that bond that the town will pay, less the MSBA share, the majority of the town share has been borrowed. It is now out.
So that's good news, because with the interest rates rising, the faster we could get that out, the lower rate we get.
Yes.
All
So
right.
we did, it's, We're not as flexible in that process as people might hope we can be, just the way we sell a bond, but we tried to move really quickly this summer. We got in ahead of a couple of the Fed rate increases. So that bond is out. I will remind people, though, that the way the bond is structured and the timing of our sale, we will not start paying on that bond until fiscal 24. Our first payment is next summer, and that's in fiscal 24. So the tax bills people will get in fiscal 23 do not include anything for that bond yet. And that's what we had talked about when we talked about approving the project. So we're making the final payment for the high school in 23, and then we start paying for that bond for the Hanlon-Deerfield fiscal 24.
All right, George, that appears to be all the members' questions, if you want to open it up to public. Unless, George Laham, you have something else?
No, thank you, Mr. Parita.
Good. No, let's, Chris, let's go ahead and open up and see if there are any questions from the public. And who can see those? Chris, can you see those? If there's any questions coming in on the side?
I can only see if
There are no open questions that I can see. If you just click on the Q&A button, you would see them in there.
oh yeah, all right.
Okay, good. Thank you. You're a good teacher. All right. I
No
don't see
open
any.
questions. All right, so let's move on.
Can I interrupt? Oh, just a quick
Yeah.
question.
Go ahead.
Follow up on Pam, can you tell us what the interest rate we got on those bonds?
I can. So let me just grab. So in the spring, kind of for the first couple of pieces, 2.27%. In the summer, it was post some of the interest rate rising conditions, 3.7.
Great rates.
But
Thank you.
30-year bonds. Yeah, so we all got a little greedy the last couple of years with some very, very low rates, but 3.7 locked in for a 30-year term for that size bond. And again, that's the bulk of what we're going to sell for that project.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I guess I want to thank Chairman Gotti. I want to thank Mr. Coleman, Town Administrator. And I certainly, again, Pam, once again, wish you the best. Thank you so very much. And I'm sure you will still be there to watch and guide us if we need your assistance. But good luck, Pam. I really mean that.
And
Thank
George-
you, and the best of all of you. I've enjoyed working with all of you. Thank you.
And for the
All right.
FinCom, there is a public thank you, a public acknowledgement of Pam next Thursday, the 20th at 4 p.m. at the Westwood Public Library. If you'd like to stop by and wish her well in person.
And Pam, I will tell you, there's only one thing that would keep me away from being there. That is being with my granddaughter in Florida on next Thursday. So I will wish you the best, but
Yes.
I literally will be at my granddaughter. So good luck. Okay.
Thank you.
That's-
Thank you
that's-
all.
Rob,
Thank you,
that's
everybody.
assuming that the driveway gets repaved, right?
Yeah.
We'll be all set, Chris. Don't you worry about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you so very much. I guess we can move along to our next folks, which are going to be the Superintendent of Schools, Emily. And we have Emily, I believe, coming in, Emily Parks and Abby Hanscom, if I'm correct. So Emily, how are you?
Hello, good evening.
Good, how are you? And there is, okay, now we've got your team there. And once again, thank you so very much for getting your information to us ahead of time. It's just very useful to be able to go through it and read it, okay? So I thank you both. And just the
Great.
two of you tonight, Emily?
I think Charlie Donahue, the school committee chair, is here as well. Do you see him?
I don't
I'm
see
not able
Charlie.
to see.
Welcome. I'm very glad you're here. We would have liked to have had anybody who wants to come to the school committee is always welcome.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
So Emily, do you want to, thank you for sending us your presentation. Do you want to take us through it? And then the process is we'll wait to the end before there are any questions. And then Chris Parada is going to watch who raises their hands. We'll have FinCom members ask questions first, and then we'll bring in any citizen questions, okay?
Great. All right, sounds good. I will
All right,
share
thank
my
you.
screen. Hopefully you were able to see that. So good evening. First, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I need to make some apologies for Lemma Jean-Baptiste, who is our Director of Finance and Operations. As Rob Gotti mentioned, there are many, many meetings tonight in town, and Lemma is a panelist at WEAC's forum on our potential solar canopy project. So she sends her regrets, but I am joined tonight by Abby Hanscom, who is the district's Director of Student Services. In that role, Abby is responsible for special education programming, pre-K to 12, as well as other services such as nursing, guidance, and English language learner services. So I asked Abby to come here tonight because, as you will see, special education is a topic that we're thinking a lot about right now. So I was asked tonight to talk a bit about the school department's operational priorities and concerns that we may be bringing to FinCom as part of the budget development conversation this year. So I will just start by saying that I think it actually goes without saying the last 2 years have been unusual and challenging in a lot of ways. I'm really proud of the work that we've done in the school department during this period of time. I'm happy to say that we're off to a really good start this year. Within the walls of the classroom, as I'm out and about, and what principals and teachers are reporting, is that this fall really feels like sort of a normal start to a school year. And so that is great. What we are finding, though, is that there are still a lot of things that are happening outside of the school walls in the world that are impacting our work in schools, and specifically some of the things that we're thinking about from a budget perspective. So we're going to talk about some of those things tonight. I will echo what Mr. Gotti, Mr. Coleman said earlier, that I think we're really going to benefit this year making our way through some of these unique circumstances because Westwood is a town with such good governance and good financial policies. And so I feel fortunate to be in that context right now in particular. So just to remind folks about the budget development process, it's sort of a long timeline and it starts about now. So at the October school committee meeting tomorrow, the school committee will have an initial discussion about some of our priorities looking ahead to next year, to FY24. We will pretty immediately be starting the process of developing budget requests with our cost center leaders, with department heads, with principals and directors. All of those things will come together, and the district leadership team, that's the pre-K to 12 team, all of our building administrators and central office folks, will look at everything and evaluate priorities and ultimately develop a proposed budget. So it really is the job of the superintendent and the district leadership team to take a holistic view of the district and make sure that we understand all of the needs and sort of weigh out the priorities and figure out, what we're going to be putting forth to the school committee. The superintendent's proposed budget is presented in January at school committee. The school committee holds public budget hearing. In February, the proposed budget is presented at FinCom. The school committee votes on the school budget. We meet with your subcommittee, your education subcommittee as well. Obviously, we have public hearings, and then ultimately that leads to finalizing the process in the spring. I say this tonight in part to say, here's the journey we're about to embark on, but also as a reminder that part of what we're doing in FY23 is managing a budget that was developed and approved a year ago, when some of the challenges that we're encountering now economically were not apparent. We did not see them in our crystal ball. And so we're having to kind of work our way through that situation. Oh, and I did note here on the side that, of course, the budget steering group, which is comprised of members from the town and from the school department, meets throughout this process to really have an understanding of what the budget picture is, and to hear each other's needs and make sure that we're working collaboratively. So when we develop our budget, we have certain drivers that are always in place. Schools are people-driven organizations. a major driver for us is meeting our contractual salary obligations and other fixed costs. And I was thinking the other day, this term fixed cost is a little bit misleading. The thing that's fixed about it is that we need to have it, right? Like we must have heat. That is a fixed circumstance. The cost itself is not fixed, as we're seeing, right? The cost does unfortunately rise. So we first have to take a look at those issues. In the school department, we talk a lot about maintaining reasonable class sizes, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. We need to address our special education needs. And then, of course, we want to continue to make progress on the program goals that are articulated in our strategy for district improvement. So those are always the things that we go into the budget process thinking about. We have some unique circumstances related to each of these drivers for this year that we're in, and also as we think ahead to FY24. And so what Abby and I want to do tonight is take a look at a couple of these drivers. So we're going to talk a bit about personnel costs, some issues around class sizes as we stabilize from the pandemic. Of course, we have our Hanlon-Deerfield consolidation on the horizon, so we're thinking about that. Inflationary and supply chain pressures, increased costs and volatility in special education that we're experiencing. And then we want to talk about some of our specific capital needs. So first, something that is significant and unusual for us is that we currently have an unsettled contract with the Westwood Teachers Association. That is our largest bargaining unit. And because that contract has not yet been settled, that does create some budget uncertainty for us, both this year and also as we start to develop the FY24 contract. We are getting back at the table next week, and so hopefully we will work our way through that process. We did settle with 2 of our bargaining units last spring, our custodians and our administrative assistants, and we will be bargaining with our remaining 2 units this year, instructional assistants and food services. We are really experiencing a quite unusual labor market, and I'm sure this doesn't come as a surprise to you. This is not just impacting schools, it's impacting many sectors. But we are really finding it much more challenging than in the past to find candidates for paraprofessional roles, such as instructional assistants, applied behavioral analysis tutors, substitute teachers, and substitute nurses. In fact, we began the school year not fully staffed in some of these positions. And so whereas we usually would have wrapped up our hiring season, it feels like the hiring season is just an ongoing process at this point. And so we're thinking quite a bit about that. You know, an impact of that is that we're forced to use contracted service providers in order to meet our legal obligations in special education. So there are services required in students' individualized education plans that we have to have. And so we have had to think differently about how to staff some of those positions. That model, though, is less cost effective. And so it certainly isn't our desired approach. And so it's less cost effective in terms of literally the dollars that it costs to use that model, but it's also just really disruptive. It results in sort of frequent onboarding and offboarding of staff, which isn't desirable for us, educationally, but it isn't desirable for us operationally either. So these are the non-financial costs, just the level of disruption, the uncertainty, the increased need for ongoing training. In terms of class sizes, we have a really good situation right now in terms of class sizes. Our current class sizes are almost all within the school committee's class size guideline. We have a really a high desire to continue to keep class sizes, especially at the elementary level, small, as we're continuing to stabilize after the pandemic disruption. Something that we've noted is that over the last 2 years, we have just seen more movement in the early grades in particular over the summer than maybe we historically have. And that has made kindergarten enrollment in particular harder to predict. And enrollment, even I would say K-2, a little bit harder to predict. And so we did make, I think, some smart decisions in developing the FY23 budget and held on to some elementary sections, anticipating that we would see an increase in elementary enrollment over the summer. We did. We ended up with about 40 more students across the district than we could see at the time that we were developing the budget. And that decision, I think, has really paid off in terms of the class sizes that we currently have in the district. Thinking ahead to the Hanlon-Deerfield consolidation, and you'll be hearing more about this later, but the timeline is we've broken ground, which is very exciting. And now the new building is scheduled to open in February 2024. The thinking is that we would be opening the new building right after the February vacation. And so our as we think about the FY24 budget development, we're thinking about that with an eye towards that moment of consolidation. We already, even in the current budget, have made some staffing decisions with this timeline in mind. And I put an example here. So, you know, as we think about consolidating buildings, and we looked at our elementary librarian staffing, where we actually are sharing people at times across the district, we didn't want to, we wanted to create a staffing model now that will easily fold into the consolidation when that happens next year. So we are really mindful of that. We have staff that are assigned to multiple buildings. The staffing model and the budget process will consider that consolidation process is happening. I do want to clarify, because I think this is a question people have, that general education classrooms will not be consolidated in February 2024. So we will start the year with some number of class sections at Hanlon and some number at Deerfield. And when the new building opens in February 2024, all of those classes will move to the new building. Same number of sections, same teachers, just in a new space. However, subsequent to that, in subsequent years, there may be opportunities to create more efficient class sections the following year. So, for example, we could end up with a situation where we have 4 class sections in a particular grade when the building opens, but the enrollment numbers might allow for that to be collapsed to 3 sections the following year. Next, just a few thoughts about inflation and supply chain pressures. So we are experiencing rising costs for sure. I'm sure that everyone is experiencing this in their homes. One example of that is a significant driver for us is rising transportation costs. We are currently in year 1 of a new 3-year transportation contract for general education. This is for our yellow buses. And, that contract is in part driven by the cost of fuel. So we saw a 7.43% increase in year 1 of this new transportation contract, with 3.3% of that attributable to fuel costs. Notably, though, we didn't anticipate that was going to happen at this time last year. And so we had budgeted for a 3% increase in our transportation lines. Year 2 of the contract, I believe, is about another 7% increase, and then a 3% increase in year 3. We also are in the process of negotiating our special education transportation contract. We decided last year to negotiate a 1-year contract for this year and then to reopen it going forward. We are experiencing, however, a 10% increase this year. And so the future, of course, is to be determined as we go through that process. We're seeing rising facilities costs. Just as an example here, a recent quote for some HVAC units, the cost has escalated 20% from what we understood 9 months ago. So some sudden and significant increases. We're anticipating increased costs for heat, A bit of good news in all of this, though, is that our electric utility costs are locked in through a fixed price contract until FY27. And so I give Lemma a lot of credit for her work to make that that happen. So we do have some stability in that area. Now I'm going to turn it over to Abby to talk a bit about special education.
Great. Thank you, Emily. If you can be the driver of the slide.
I will do that.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is that we every year receive a memo from the Operational Services Division called OSD from the state that gives us a number to anticipate what we should budget for increase in what are broadly termed social service costs. So many of the things inside the Student Services Department qualify as those type of costs. And every year that I've done this job, I'm in my 12th year, that number has been between 2 and 3%. This year, the memo came out with a striking number of 13%. So we want to communicate that clearly to everyone to say that the organization that does the projecting for social service cost projections for the state has sent this to every municipality, and we are aware that this is a number we have to contend with. An additional interesting dynamic, and Emily spoke a little bit about move-ins and movement in where people were moving in terms of younger grades, is that over the summer, for the first time since I've worked here, we received multiple students for whom they were entering the district and they had already been placed in what's called an out-of-district placement by their previous school system. And it's a really important fact to understand that students with IEPs have a protection where what's written in their IEP and consented to by their parents in one town has the same force in another town, and it actually has the same force across all 50 states in the United States, and that's very important protection for students with disabilities, so their schooling is not interrupted. However, this dynamic of people perhaps in previous years waiting to move and now moving has created an influx of students who have out-of-district placements on IEPs that were not written by Westwood originally, but Westwood is responsible for honoring. And so when that occurs, we receive that responsibility, and there's many different parameters related to that, but what essentially happens is we assume responsibility for much of that tuition and any ancillary transportation costs. And then we have a very interesting development in the way the Department of Education has interpreted a single word in our regulations. And I'll be speaking to our Special Education Parent Advisory Council about this next week. But the state of Massachusetts has reinterpreted the term, the word benefit, and it now will appear that for next year's summer program, any child for whom the school district determines they could use special education services in the summer will gain the right to special education transportation for the period of the summer only in order to benefit from those services. And historically, that has not been the interpretation. And students who did not have that service during the school year also did not have it in the summer. However, the state has altered that read, and we've been directed in our first meeting in September of the year to plan for this coming summer to offer transportation to anybody for whom the summer services are offered. And for us, that, takes our number of students we would potentially be transporting from maybe 65 to 100 kids to 220 kids. And that's a rate of increase that's really very large. So we are already starting to strategize about that. But those three dynamics have taken what is normally kind of a volatile department and really thrown some real turbulence into our department and our planning. So broadly speaking, what that means is that for this fiscal year, our special education costs are exceeding our budgeted costs. And the important fact of that is that it's highly unusual for us to know that in October. So it may be that during the school year, we have students who have unexpected costs. However, it's very unusual that in October, we have this understanding that we, in this point across all our different department needs, could be as much as $1.14 million over budget in special education. That is very rare for us. Now, what's important to know is that we actually have mechanisms in place on the school side, and Lemma's really been very wonderful in this piece of her work, that we have held over grant funding from previous years. So we will be able to apply a large chunk of that to defray these anticipated costs if all of our projections play out across the year in the way we see them today. In addition, we do a couple of important things over time to create reserve accounts, and there are sufficient funds in that account to cover any uncovered overage from the grant funding. For the first time in my entire career, 29 years, I'm going to file a claim for what's called extraordinary relief. And that's really important because there is a mechanism from the State Department of Education where if your special education funds for 1 year are somehow misaligned with your needs, there's a mechanism to apply for extraordinary relief. And I've already notified the Department of Education that I plan to do that filing. And I think I was the first person in Massachusetts to do that. And they told me to write them an email again back in January when they're ready to receive the request. The other important thing to understand is we have two large mechanisms to mitigate special education costs, and I'd be happy to talk more about them if people have specific questions. But the first is called circuit breaker, and as you can envision, it's a circuit breaker mechanism on the financial side to mitigate large expenses. So of those new tuitions, for example, we will pay them this year. However, we will claim a kind of a relief financially that will be paid in the next fiscal year on that same expense. So that's called circuit breaker. We file that claim every year in June. And I take a lot of pride in putting in the most aggressive claim we can and receiving the funds that the town is due. Additionally, we participate in Medicaid claiming, and there's a very elaborate and complicated process behind that, which provides federal funds passed through the state to the locality, again, for medical, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, nursing, interventions that school districts are providing for children with disabilities. And we will, again, increase our claiming on that because we will be serving more students. However, both of those, the funds that you receive come through in arrears, if you think about it, in the following fiscal year. All of this has significant implications for the next fiscal year. So while we have funds to manage any overages for this year, and we have many mitigating things we're going to do, we really do now have to think forward into fiscal 24. And what I really don't want to have happen is that we're unable to continue to innovate and grow programming for students with disabilities in the community. And so we're already starting to have conversations about growing one of our very, very successful programs that's located right now at the Downey School, and potentially building a second classroom of that in another elementary school to be able to provide those services to more students. And we're trying to now figure out how much play will we have in the ability to kind of innovate as opposed to manage these unexpected costs. And the other kind of thing that I think the school committee will be discussing, and we'll probably be back here to talk with you folks, is the way we manage the special education reserve account. And is it possible potentially to put more funds into that reserve account in the future to hedge against some of these really striking shifts in both the employment sector, the transportation, and the tuition sector that we're seeing.
Great, thanks, Abby.
Mhm.
So I will just wrap it up here, switching for a second from operational budget to capital needs. So one of the things that I think Chris talked about in his presentation is we sort of have a reasonably anticipated annual capital allocation. It's been about $1.1 million for the last few years for the school department. But then we typically have needs that really just exceed the capacity of that annual budget. And so we've used that, additional capital article mechanism as a way of addressing those kinds of things. So one thing that's on the horizon here is the district network upgrade. This is something that's been foreshadowed in the 5-year capital plan for some time. Unfortunately, what has happened is that the cost of the project, as we're seeing everywhere, it has really escalated. And so the anticipated cost is now 1.3 million, which is about $400,000 over the budget. And so I know Lemma has already had some conversations with Pam, and this is something that we'll be bringing to budget steering as we think about our capital needs. Similarly, the Westwood High School auditorium lighting and dimming system is in need of some work. It's hard to imagine, but that building was constructed in 2004. So it's getting to be about time to replace that. And that's an estimated cost of about $400,000. And then we have some school vehicles for our facilities team that need replacement. We have a tractor that's over 14 years old that was replaced this year because it unfortunately suddenly failed. So we had not anticipated having to replace that out of our vehicles budget, but we did. And therefore, the van purchase that we had budgeted for was delayed. So for the van for the maintenance staff will be 17 years old in FY24. And then just on the horizon, as we think about that Hanlon-Deerfield opening, a tractor will be required for the walkway there for snow removal. So those are, I would say, sort of the big ticket items that we will be talking about as throughout that budget steering process. And so that's it for the slides. I am just going to take this one moment. Many people have said nice things about Pam Dukeman tonight, and I feel that I would be remiss if I did not also say that Pam has been just a tremendous resource and collaborator for the school department. And we feel very, very fortunate to have worked with her and appreciate her a great deal. So we wish her well and thank her for all of her work. And we, of course, look forward to a similar collaboration with a new finance director. I think that is it for us, George.
So will you unshare your screen and it will?
Oh, yes. Sorry. What am I? There we go.
Okay.
You were watching me try to figure out what I was doing there.
That's okay. Thank you so very much. I will open it up to questions and Mr. Pareda will determine who goes first.
Michael Gay.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily and Abby. I knew that there were challenges, but I wasn't aware of the magnitude. So thank you so much for sharing. Abby, I've got some questions on the special education bullets that you provided. The first one, the operational services division memo. Is there a way that we could get a copy of that to understand what they're anticipating? Do they give more detail on that? Because that's a huge jump.
Yep, I'd be happy to share it to you.
That's my first question. Second question, with the influx of incoming Westwood residents that are bringing in out of town placement IEP, did we also see individuals that were in Westwood move out to offset, or was this all a net add? So were they just coming in, nobody was going out?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I always want to be very thoughtful and speak in a way that never compromises a single person's confidentiality. So I hope you can appreciate that balance.
100%.
In this instance, it is a net add.
Net add, okay. And then finally, on the extraordinary relief ask to the state, which I'm very happy to be first in this case, so well done on that front. I'd love to understand how you are framing the ask. What is going into, the calculation and what we're actually going to the state for. And if you wanted, any help from, myself or this board, we're happy to roll up our sleeves.
Thank you very much. We will get parameters that we are allowed to ask for, and I'm happy to share those publicly. We will complete that claim most likely as part of our usual circuit breaker claim process, which occurs May, June every year. And we're happy to report out both the ask and the what is received. My understanding is that in most instances, it includes unanticipated expenses specifically to tuition and transportation. Those are the two big topics that we're most likely to see relief on.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in for 1 second to say, first of all, Abby, we are very lucky to have Abby. She does a wonderful job for us. I don't know that being first in line means that we get preference, but well done. However, this is obviously a topic of conversation as well among all superintendents in the state. And I think that there will be considerable advocacy from the State Superintendents Association also, because we certainly aren't the only folks facing some of these pressures.
I had a quick question, if I could say something.
Go ahead, Charles.
Okay, I'm fortunate this year to be chairman of the school committee with the staff you just heard from. It's incredible the work that they do. It was briefly mentioned at the beginning, but the last 2 years have been unbelievable for all school districts. How do you get kids back safely? How do you get teachers back safely? How do you keep testing? It's been a tremendous period. So at the last school committee meeting, I said, what do we need to do to recover? There's a lot of talk on this. We've been through a tough time, and the staff mentioned this a little bit tonight, but the major problem that we need to find new money for were mental health issues from the kids, what they've been through. So that's a unique thing that's new. And that's when I said, what do we need to find new money for? That was the answer that I got, which it didn't shock me, but I was quite surprised that that's one of the greatest challenges for our school district and many of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. John Kerry.
Hi, good evening, and thank you both for the presentation. I've got two questions, and Michael kind of got to the first one. But on that increase from the OSB, could you just help me to understand the materiality of that by maybe addressing just what the social service costs are as a percentage of the total budget broadly?
Sure. So, and I think the term social service doesn't apply in municipal school budgeting in the same way that it does perhaps in other large scale municipal settings. For us, what we're talking about are expenses that are specifically related to the education of children with disabilities. So we're talking about both tuitions to collaboratives, private day schools, and residential schools that are set by the state of Massachusetts. And each of those schools can seek an increase year over year for their tuition, and that tuition rate is then set and published back out to the municipalities. And so you can anticipate that each of those schools is having similar conversations about things like the cost of heat, the cost of staff, other costs, and they are coming forward and presenting tuition increases that are much higher than their standard request, which is about 3% a year. And so if that's happening kind of across the entire ecosystem of those schools, you can then understand that that number is getting bigger and bigger for everybody. So that's the first driver. The second is transportation. So in special education, students, as part of their IEP, the document that guides their education, may have specialized transportation. So the most common thing people are familiar with are probably wheelchair vans, right? So vans that have wheelchair accessibility, but other students who don't require that may require just a small van or a smaller environment or a monitor. And those particular transportation costs have been very, very impacted by the labor disruption that we're seeing nationally. So our van vendor currently has, we've asked them for a route and they don't have the staff or the vehicle to answer the call for that particular route. And we just partnered with a neighboring town and they came to our rescue and we collaborated with them, but our vendor was actually not able to even produce that route. So you can also imagine that exact same kind of magnification is happening, and those vendors are asking for 10, 11, 12% increases for their fees. And so that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
Abby, could you just sort of talk order of magnitude in terms of like the cost of some of these out of district tuitions? Because I think maybe some folks don't have that frame of reference.
Thank you. That's
So
the basis of the question.
Yep. Sorry. The most cost effective would range probably between $60,000 to $75,000 for a school year tuition. The next range up would be about $100,000 to $135,000, and then the very most expensive tuitions range between $200,000 and $235,000. So on average, an average tuition usually comes in at right around $100,000. Transportation, broadly speaking, for an individual student can range. Sometimes it can be very cost effective if we already have a van going to the same place, but we often budget about $25,000 additional for transport for an individual student because we don't exactly know the route at the very beginning. So very easily, say 4 students can equal, $500,000 of unanticipated cost.
And one of the things that we do in the budget development process is we have students who have no needs. And so we're really making projections about what their needs will be going forward. And then we do have conversations about whether or not we should budget beyond the known needs, and if so, at what level. And to decide to budget in that way, mitigating against risk financially, so to speak, means therefore that you can't do something else that you want to do in the budget, right? And so we sort of do, an analysis each year, and what we have decided upon, what we did this year was we decided that we would carry over some IDEA grant funding that we were allowed to carry over to this fiscal year rather than increase the operating budget. It now seems that that was a very good idea because we're going to need to access that funding. And then in addition, we have that special education reserve account where we go through this Medicaid reimbursement process and we funnel that money back into the special education reserve so that we have that to draw on. So we feel like we have taken some really important steps for this year, but to drain that special education reserve is really concerning, and as we think about how to develop the budget going forward, right? It creates a different analysis.
John, any follow-up?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's quite helpful. My second question really is about labor, and just kind of hoping you could bifurcate that issue and talk about where do you just have labor availability issues versus where do you have significant wage pressures, and kind of what we can expect outside of collective bargaining going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I will say we're fully staffed at the moment for our professional staff, our licensed teachers. We actually saw less what we call turnover over the summer in our teaching ranks than we have the last couple of years. And so that was relatively stable. I mean, there will always be people whose life circumstances are different, right? But we're in good shape there, although I will say special education is a very challenging field right now. And that is a place where many districts are finding it challenging. And so I would say that we have had to we've hired some experienced special ed teachers at a higher cost than I think we might have in some other years where the market different. Is that fair to say, Abby?
Absolutely. And I want to say we prioritized working very hard this summer to ensure that every single faculty position, classroom teacher, learning center teacher was fully hired and onboarded prior to the beginning of school. We have a cadre of folks who we call applied behavior analysis tutors who provide very specialized work. And we are fully staffed in those folks. And really what we see is that, in fact, it's really in our paraprofessionals, which we would call instructional assistants, where people have a lot of choices for what they want to do. And there are many options for them. And so we continue to have vacancies today that is kind of unheard of for us. We've always been a very, sought after district to work in. And it's not because there's something different about Westwood, it's that the entire job market in that kind of sector has been disrupted.
Yeah. So instructional assistants, substitute teachers, certainly bus drivers, van drivers, those aren't our employees, right? But we're experiencing the impact of that. For example, there was a day this week when the bus company informed us they were short a driver. And so one of our elementary bus routes, there was no driver. And so the bus had to go out, do its regular route, and then go back out and pick up the kids that were missed. So those kinds of challenges, food services. So it is quite different. I will say we're very fortunate. I heard from a superintendent in a bigger district than Westwood recently, but they're still hiring 30 teaching positions.
Thanks, Emily. In order to move this along, I just want to make sure the members know that Charles Donahue is the chairman of the school committee, in case people were wondering who he is. Christina, you're up.
Thanks, Chris. Nice to see you again. Great job, Emily and Abby. It was really illuminating to hear your perspective on this. One of the things I think we can all empathize with is your challenges with the labor market. One of the things that I noticed last year was the teachers only received the 3% raise, which was not in line with inflation, which is a little concerning to me, just because of the tight labor market. Have you guys given any thought to if we are going to increase teacher salaries in line with inflation and what that might do to our overall budget?
Mm-hmm. So as I said, we don't have a settled contract now. So I don't think it's accurate to say they received a 3% increase because we don't have a settled contract, right?
Sorry, I think that was last year. It was 3%.
That I don't believe. No, it wasn't. And I would have to go back and look. I believe is actually 2.
It was very, very low, which was concerning because we've got great teachers and retaining them is obviously a huge priority.
We certainly have wonderful teachers. Absolutely. And I would say that what you're speaking to is something that superintendents and teachers unions are discussing across the state right now. The way that teachers' contracts are structured is that it's a step scale. And so in Westwood, each step, so each year somebody is here, the following year they get a step, and a step is a 4% increase. And so the percentage that you're referring to is what we would call a COLA. So that would be an additional % increase that's applied to the whole scale, right? So if I am a teacher that gets a 2% COLA and I'm taking a step, it's a 6% increase, if that makes sense, right? However, we have a lot of very experienced teachers in Westwood, and those teachers have reached the top of the scale. And so for those folks, there is no step, right? And so certainly, as I think everyone is experiencing right now, inflation is a significant pressure that people are experiencing. So we value our teachers, absolutely, and we're going to keep working through that process. And I mean, as a member of FinCom, you also have a very keen understanding of the realities. Inflation also impacts the other side.
If I can make a suggestion, I'd like to pause this presentation and give John Cummings and Maya a chance to present the Hanlon-Deerfield School. And Emily, if you don't mind, and Abby, just sticking around, so I'll entertain more questions, but let them make their presentation because I'm very sensitive to time. And then we'll let people ask both questions to the superintendent, Abby, and to John Cummings and Maya and the consultants, okay? And then we'll open it up to the public. So if that's okay, I would ask that we move John Cummings and Maya in and let them take us through their part of this, the school presentation, okay?
It certainly is. And actually, George, I am presenting that presentation as well. So I'm just going to keep going then, but I have to switch to a different set of slides.
Perfect.
And so thank you. I'm going to be talking about the building project, and I'm going to begin the presentation, and then I'm going to turn it over to Maya. So,
While we're waiting for Emily to do that, Victoria, if you can let in members of our team, of the project team, Brian Jarvis, Chin Lin, Donald Walter, and Rob Fitzgerald, that would be great. These are members of Compass, the project manager, and Doran Whittier, our architect.
Excellent.
Okay. All right, so thank you. I will move briskly through this. So we've been asked to give sort of a quick start to finish review of the project. I know that there are several new members of the FinCom, and then to update the group about the project status. So I will just remind people that this is the Hanlon-Deerfield project that is going to consolidate the current Hanlon and Deerfield elementary schools at the current Hanlon location on Gay Street. This school was designed to accommodate up to 560 students. It was designed to support the educational programs in Westwood and to facilitate today's educational environment. In addition, the school building committee engaged with the residents a great deal throughout the process. And so the project really features what Westwood residents identified as priorities for the community. Things like new playing field, a large gymnasium, additional performance space, retaining access to Lowell Woods, and a plan to mitigate traffic. To remind people what the impetus for this is, in 2015, the school committee commissioned a master planning capital needs study. It identified 3 elementary schools that were in significant need of modernization and had significant infrastructure needs due just to the aging systems. The 2 schools that this project addresses, Hanlon and Deerfield, were built in the 1950s. And despite the fact that I think the district has done a really good job maintaining the buildings, they just have significant challenges in areas like heating and cooling and plumbing and electrical. The current buildings aren't ADA compliant and accessible, and therefore they really just don't serve the range of students that we educate today in Westwood. And so we embarked in this process. Understanding the needs that we had in April 2017, Westwood submitted what's called a statement of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority for Hanlon to see if the state would be willing to provide partial funding to this project so that we could address our needs. Getting to this program is really pretty competitive. We were very fortunate to be one of 15 communities out of 82 applicants who were accepted into the program on our first try. After we were accepted for Hanlon, we met with the MSBA to ask if they would expand their investment in Westwood to a project that let us address the needs in more than one building. And they agreed to do that. With that commitment at a town meeting in the spring of 2018, residents funded a feasibility study to look at different options. And then in April 2021, the MSBA voted to grant Westwood a reimbursement amount of up to $18.2 million for the Hanlon-Deerfield project that we proposed. And it was, of course, approved last fall by residents at a special town meeting. The feasibility study was really thorough. It was a transparent community process. It included 75 open public meetings and community forums. We were in front of the FinCom on 10 different occasions to talk about the project. Initially, residents were presented with 15 potential project options. We looked at new construction. We looked at additions and renovations. We just looked at base repair. We looked at consolidating Hanlon and Deerfield. We also looked at consolidating Hanlon and Sheehan. We shortlisted the projects to a list of 7, and developed evaluation criteria through the community engagement process. And ultimately, there was one recommended project, the one that is going forward. So again, it is for a Hanlon-Deerfield building, a new building with a design enrollment of 560 students. I will just note that though the school will be below that enrollment capacity when it opens, that number of 560 students was determined through multiple enrollment projection studies that indicated a need to plan for enrollment growth at the elementary level. And, you know, we've been through that process as a community before. When we built the current high school, we had a similar process, and therefore built a building that could accommodate 1,000 students. Our enrollment cycle at the high school peaked a couple of years ago, just over 1,000. And so we were able to accommodate that cycle. We talked a lot during the feasibility study about what the right size is for an elementary school. We had a lot of conversation about small neighborhood schools and the value of them, but that also there is such a thing as a school that is too small, both educationally and operationally. So Hanlon and Deerfield currently have about 180 students each. That is a very small size for schools in Massachusetts. It's pretty much unheard of. Just by contrast, all of the elementary schools in neighboring towns in Needham, Dover, and Medfield are at least twice as big as that, with some as large as 650, and they're still considered small schools. So a lot of conversation in the project about sort of the benefits of consolidation. Just some sustainability highlights. The building incorporates important sustainability features that align with the town's goals and its comprehensive plan. We're really excited. We think that when it opens, this building will be a model for other districts in the state. And you can see on the screen some of the many sustainability features of this building. The school has been designed to retain the advantages of a small school. We are clustering the classrooms into grade level neighborhoods. The building includes adequate space for small group work, as well as a whole host of special education services, speech, counseling, psych, OT, and also specially designed space for multiple district-wide special education programs that are really important to us so that we can meet the needs of almost all of our students in district. And reflecting back on our prior conversation, that's important to us educationally in terms of our values. We really have a vision of a very inclusive environment for students where they're educated to the maximum extent possible in their home community. It also reflects our belief that we can provide high quality, cost-effective in-district programs rather than relying on more costly out-of-district placements. And so when this building opens, there is a specialized program that currently is at Deerfield that will be moving into this building. And then there is a program at the Downey School that will be moving into this building. The building also includes modern day security features and a deliberate separation between academic wings and public space that could be used after hours by the community. So quickly, a couple of renderings. The aesthetic design took inspiration from the building's natural surroundings with materials in a color palette that reflect the surrounding woods. This is a rendering of the main entrance to the building. This is again the main entrance to the building where you can see the academic wings on the left and the gym here on the right. The inside uses natural light and a warm palette to create kind of this nice inviting space. This is a view of the cafeteria. The cafeteria incorporates the performance space here with a stage. This is a view of the gym. We heard a lot about gyms during the community process and the need for more gym space in town. So we think this will be a wonderful resource. This is an example of a typical classroom space. This is a rendering of the playground. I hasten to add, these were just placeholder equipment pieces. We've made some different decisions since this rendering, but it's going to be a wonderful accessible playground with play features like swings and an area for hardscape games, a half basketball court, and some grassy areas as well. And this is the view from Gay Street. Now I'm going to turn it over to Maya.
Thanks, Emily. I've been in front of a number of you. I know a number of you, but just by means of introduction, my name is Maya Plotkin. I am on the school committee, and I am also chair of the school building committee, which has been shepherding this project through. And I have the grim task of talking about numbers. So we wanted to give you sort of a history of the budget and where we've come since we finalized the budget. So the original budget, and this was presented at town meeting, was $87.8 million. We were very aware of the fact that we were in a post-COVID volatile market. And so we did some diligence along the way before we went out for construction bids. The construction bid date was June 22nd. So the first thing we did was in January of 2022, we got an estimate from the cost estimators when we were about 60% of the way through construction documents. And at that point, we were sort of bang on budget, which was great news, considering that we were in that post-COVID environment. 90% completion of the construction documents. We did another estimate in April. And at that point, we came in 1.4 million over budget. I just want to remind people that in February of 2022, the war in the Ukraine broke out. That clearly affected our costs in April and, caused our costs to increase. For example, I think electrical alone between January and April went up by almost $2 million. So we were about 1.4 million over. And so in the next few months before the construction bid date, we did a lot of work, the school building committee. We did a lot of value engineering, looking at the project to see what we could take out of the project or what we could reduce without affecting the real goals of the project. And we also moved a number of items that were in the base bid to alternates. So we could have the option of not moving forward with them on bid day. So all of those efforts resulted in an overage. We found about $3.3 million. And so going into bid day on June 22nd, we actually had a buffer of about almost $2 million. And we were very excited about that. And then we got to bid day. And this is sort of what we looked like. The column on the left, the budgeted cost with all of our alternates included and a 6.2% contingency. You could see our project costs were $87.8 million. That's how we came up with that number. The buffering that we did was basically a reduction of the construction costs down to 69.5 million and an increase in the contingency to 6.2%. Because again, we were worried about costs. We really wanted to try and get a good buffer in there. So going into bid day, we were at $87.8 million. The lowest bid, and that's with all of our alternates 1 through 7 included. Our alternates were, alternate 1 was the UV lighting system that would filter, that would further filter our HVAC system and provide a better quality of air. Alternate 2 was that walkway canopy in front of the building that you saw that would provide shelter from the rain. And then alternates 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, mainly related to exterior sites. So exterior furnishings like plantings and benches, there was additional landscaping. So the lowest bid, including alternates 1 and 2, which the SBC decided were really critical to the project, and with reducing the contingency to 5%, which is really the lowest we felt comfortable moving this project forward. That resulted in a total project cost of $91.2 million. So at that point, we were about $3.4 million over budget. This is on bid day. And so the next step was to try and find $3.4 million. And if we couldn't do that, then I don't think anyone on the project was comfortable moving forward. So Emily, if you'll flip the slide. Oh. Thanks. So this is where we found it. We had unspent feasibility funds, as Emily mentioned. The town in April of 2018 did approve a certain amount of money for that feasibility phase. We didn't spend all of it. We had about $203,000 left. So we have applied those leftover funds to this phase of the project, so we could use those funds. We are receiving an incentive from Eversource because of our sustainability efforts of about $140,000. So we would apply that to this project. The school district has had a mitigation fund that came a few years ago when University Station was put in place. This mitigation fund was put in place in case University Station produced more students into the district than was estimated. We have been holding on to those funds for a rainy day. University Station, as you know, did not require us to use those funds. We thought we might have to use them during COVID, but between state aid, we were able to get past that. So we applied, the school committee voted in July, early July, to apply that $2 million to this project to allow it to proceed. The town is receiving ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds. These are funds that are specifically designated to address COVID-related problems. And the select board, working with the school district, has agreed to allocate about 1.1 million of those funds toward this project. And of course, we are getting that estimated MSBA reimbursement, and that brings us down to where we needed to be, ultimately coming with a total cost to town residents of $69.5 million. This is a few dollars less than the projected cost we had shown at town meeting. I should note that one thing I wanted to say about these numbers is this is not a problem that's unique to Westwood. There are a number of school projects that are currently in flight. And we actually, believe it or not, feel fairly lucky that we're able to proceed with our project. Just to give you comparison numbers. So our general contractor bid, as I mentioned, came about 6% over budget. And the trade bid, this is the bids coming from all the trades, was about 9.6% over budget. By comparison, Somerset, a town, their general contractor bid came in 12% over budget. Their trade bid was 14% over budget. Overall, they were $10 million over budget. They went back to their town to ask the town to allocate those funds. The town did not vote for that. And so Somerset cannot move forward with its project. It is back to square one. Nauset, another community that's currently in flight with one of their projects, they haven't gotten their general contractor bid yet, but their trade bid has already come in 30% over. So unfortunately, it seems like that project is also in trouble. So I wanted to sort of give a little bit of context for these numbers and let you know that we are not alone in this situation. So moving on from the numbers to the project schedule, this is just to let you know where we are at the moment. As Emily mentioned, in October of 2021, this past October, this project was passed at a special town meeting and in a special election. Since then, the bid documents have been finalized. We've awarded the general contractor contract, and in this past July, we started construction. So we are currently in phase one. We are in October 2022, where we're starting the foundation. There's just a couple pictures here of what's currently going on. The blasting has occurred at the site, which has been very exciting for the students who've been able to see it. And then they're also prepping for the foundation at building A, which is one of those wings. So that's where we are currently. This phase of building and site construction, where we actually expect to see the new school come up, is expected to go until February of 2024. That's when we anticipate moving both the Hanlon kids over to the new school and bringing the Deerfield kids over to the new school, and everyone kind of settles into the new school. At that point, phase 4, which is the site construction, will start. This is the demolition of the existing Hanlon school, the building of the baseball field and the soccer fields, and finalizing the parking lots and all of the landscaping, with a completion date of August 2024. So that is the project in a nutshell. I did want to say, and just sort of pile on to what people are saying about Pam. Pam has been instrumental in this project. She has been our rock. She's been our go-to person for all of our questions, and she is really phenomenal, and she will be very much missed. So I did want to give a shout out to Pam at the end of this, and happy to open it up to questions on Emily and Abby's presentation on the school project, on the school budget, and also on this school building project as well.
One question is, John Cummings going to then take us through the update on the construction process, or are we finished with the presentation?
I think we're finished, right, John?
What you saw is where we're at. So all the 8.5 acres of
Okay,
trees
wanna
have
make
been
sure.
cleared.
Okay, so thank you,
Prepping
John.
for the foundations.
John is here with the consultant, so if you have any questions back towards either the first, Maya's first her presentation and Maya's presentation, raise your little yellow hands.
Let's go back, George, let's go back to Bill Bruce
Okay,
on Emily and Abby's presentation. They
Okay.
were next up.
all right. Where is Bill?
Bill?
I'm here. I'm in the dark now.
I
But
hope
but
literally,
my
not
question was
figuratively.
just some of the questions got answered, but one of the questions I still had was around salaries. I know 85% of the school budget, that 52 million, is related to salaries. How much of that salary amount is related to the teachers, since that piece is still kind of outstanding, from
Yeah.
a negotiation perspective?
Right. Well, so we budgeted for a salary increase for teachers, knowing that we were going into a bargaining process, right? So that exists in the budget, but it's just that that percentage has not been settled at this point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we need to be very careful we don't get into.
Exactly.
the
And so I was going to say, I think I should stop there.
I think that's a good idea, Emily.
Maybe let me clarify. Let me
Yeah.
clarify the question. Of the 44 million in salaries, how much is teacher salaries?
Yes, I don't have the exact number in front of me. It's in the budget book that you received, but it is our largest bargaining unit and the highest salaries, right? So it is a very significant portion, and I can look that up if I have a second.
That's okay. Let's, Jim?
I can get that to you.
Thanks.
Jim, what was your question?
Thank you. Going back to Abby, I think she presented well on all sources of revenue and seemed to leave no stone unturned. But just referring back to the special needs kids that we take on from other towns, is there a reevaluation? For example, what happens if Westwood can offer a program in town that the town the child's coming from didn't offer? Are we still committed to that IEP, or can we reevaluate it in any way, shape, or form?
Sure. So I think what I want to say at the outset is that everything in special ed is really about trust and building relationships. It's about taking good care of very fragile kids. And so COVID, for some of our students, COVID is not over, and the impacts continue to resound for them. So you can imagine that if you are a family that just made a big move, you would try to keep other parts of your kids' lives as stable as possible. So people's first instinct is to, as long as travel time isn't, say, more than an hour, to keep their student in the same school. What I would tell you is that we immediately begin a process of getting to know anybody who moves to town, a new resident, right? And start to learn their student. And whenever we can, we offer certainly more local program options. And we work over time to build a trusting relationship with people so that they are willing to make a change. However, there are legal protections that are super important for kids with disabilities, and people have a right to stay in their last agreed upon placement. It's called stay put, and stick in that placement so their students' education is not interrupted. And so it's really all about getting to know people and building a relationship, and also articulating, for example, this beautiful new school we're building, that it has programming that is probably better than some of those out of district placements. And I don't mean that blithely in any way. And helping people kind of come on board and accept that. But it's a consent-based model. And so people need to give up something they're familiar with to take something that is new.
What you're telling me is it can be modified, but at the discretion of the parents.
Correct. And people obviously are very skeptical of things they don't know yet and people they have not yet made relationships with, and I don't blame them.
Okay, on another issue, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong. I believe last year you were talking about the summer program and extended daycare program being $150,000 to $200,000 in the deficit.
So not extended day, that's our after school program, that's tuition driven. I think
Okay.
extended school year, the special education summer program. I
Right.
think that's what you're referring to. Yes, we were over budget in the ESY program.
Okay, and that's only going to get worse with the transportation issue?
Yes. So, Abby, feel free to jump in. What we will say is that we think that the ESY programs that we've done over the last 2 summers, which have been larger than normal in terms of the number of students in it, does sort of conclude what we consider our compensatory services related to COVID. So we think that we may see a reduction in the number of students who are accessing the program. However, the new issue is this transportation cost.
Yeah, and I would just say extended school year last summer came in less over budget than the previous year. And that was directly related to the fact that we started to shape down to our more typical census. What we are looking at right now is collaborating with, not the most expensive transportation mechanism, but looking at other ways to do it, maybe yellow school buses, similar to a camp bus route, those kind of things that will mitigate these expenses. And so we are beginning that conversation. We're talking with the routing person from the yellow bus company today to start modeling that for our budget planning for November. So we will look at that and try to do this process in the most legal, ethical, and cost-effective way possible.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to circle back to Bill's question. The answer is 31.7 million to your question about the proportion of salaries that are teachers. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. George Maroon.
Yes, thank you. I think my question is going to be a pretty quick one. It's more numerical geography than anything else. So when you went to the new school budget, you identified over budget, under budget numbers, and you came back to around what the original proposal was. But with respect to the debt that was issued, I think the bulk of the issuance, probably over 50 million, I think it was 54 odd million, was issued after significant increases in interest rates. And so my quick tabulation was around 100 to 200 basis points, which I think over the course of 30 years would be around 16 million or so, roughly. Where is that accounted for in terms of the new school budget?
I think we would need Pam for this question. I know that when she was running the numbers, and I'm not sure if she's still on, I know that when she was running the numbers for the school budget, she was using an estimate of about 4% for the interest rate. She was being very conservative. And at the time that was very conservative. So I think the interest rate came in, as she mentioned, at 3.7%. So it did come in under her estimates. And those were the numbers that we presented at town meeting. I can't speak to.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the town meeting took place last year, right?
Correct, but the amount that is being borrowed by the town is the same. So we're not increasing the amount that the town is borrowing.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree on both of those points. I guess my question is with regard to the interest rate at which we issued the debt. Some of it was issued in April or March, I believe she said, and that was, it had a 2 handles, two something. then interest rates, spiked dramatically once the, FOMC started hiking in April. So the bulk of the issuance, which was 55 or 54 odd million, was issued in August, which was after the interest rate hikes. And so what I did was I compared the debt we issued before and then after, and concluded that it was about 100 basis points higher, right? And so 100 basis points on 55 million over 30 years is roughly, 15, 16 million.
George,
and I'm just wondering where that's accounted for, or where it's identified in terms of budget.
If I can make a suggestion, I think when Pam did the presentation to town meeting, she did a chart that had up to 2, 4, or 6%. I remember there was a range. I think the question needs
2,
to go
3,
back.
and 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question we need to ask Pam is the following: when you made the presentation to town meeting, you had a forecast based on a certain percentage point. How does that compare with the question that George is asking in terms of the bonds we actually issued? If you looked at the 30-year, what's the delta between what she was showing towns, the potential impact, and what the real impact will be? And George, what I suggest is, I think that the only person who can really answer that right now is Pam. So I would request that we can ask her to get that information to the Finance Commission, and we can get an answer to you. Okay?
Perfect. Yeah, that follow-up would be great. Thank you, George.
Okay, you're welcome.
Anything else, George?
No, I think you've got Alex.
Yep, Alex Hale.
Yeah, hey, everybody. Maya, thank you so much for the presentation and the update on the school project. Really exciting stuff. Let me see. Is she still here? Did I lose her? Oh, there you are. Okay, sorry. Your tile was off my screen. I just had a question. Great creative job closing the budget between the sort of most recent forecast and what was initially planned for. You don't have that slide up. You don't have to pull it up. I know there's like 4 or 5 items that contributed to you being able to cover that delta between the initially budgeted item and what the contractors came back with. Just so this commission understands any downstream implications, like were those dollars earmarked for any other budgets or to offset any other budgets in town that we should be aware of as we go into the next budgeting season?
So they were not. The feasibility funds, the 200,000 was always going to be part of this project. The 140 Eversource incentive funds were funds, it's an incentive generated by the project. So we were always going to put it back into the project. The 2 million in district mitigation funds was not earmarked for anything. And we had been, the school committee and the school district had those funds available for almost, multiple years. And so those had not been allocated for anything. The ARPA funds, as I mentioned, the town is receiving about, I think, over 5 million in ARPA funds. And we, meaning the SBC and the Permanent Building Committee, made a request to the select board that they allocate 1.1 million of that 5+ million to this project. They had not allocated, at least that portion of it. So none of these were allocated to other budgets. Nothing was taken away from something else.
Yeah, and Maya, 2 comments on that. The town had to negotiate with Norfolk County, which has some control over the release of those funds. And the town had to show Norfolk County that we met the requirements of ARPA in order to use those for school construction. The other thing I would say is, look, I'm very glad you had a chance to see the thorough presentation. At the end of the day, this is an incredibly important project for the town. I hope that we can stay within the 5% contingency. And I think with John Cummings, so I've seen John Cummings on site every time I drive by the Hanlon School. I think the Permanent Building Committee, along with the School Building Committee, has really got an incredibly important job to watch this project and monitor it. And the reality is, though, at the end of the day, I mean, we are committed to getting this thing done. I hope it's one of the concerns I have as chair of the Finance and Warrant Commission, that we constantly watch the costs as they evolve. And as we allocate other money, we just need to keep in the back of our mind, we may have to address some of these issues down the road, given the construction issue we're dealing with. I don't have any information. The only reason I'm saying that, I think it's our responsibility to watch it. But I think we've got a very, very good team with the Permanent Building Committee in place and the School Building Committee.
George, if I can just clarify my one comment. the $2 million in district litigation funds, we have had discussions in other meetings about potentially using those. This is, prior to the budget increase in this project, but using those funds for Sheehan.
Right.
As everyone knows, Sheehan is sort of a project that is on everybody's mind. So to the extent that, we're using them for this project, clearly those funds will not be available for
And I
Sheehan.
think one of the obligations the Finance Commission is going to have as we evaluate we take a look at the 5-year capital plan, as we evaluate the short-term capital items, which we're going to look at holistically in the back of our mind. We just need to make sure we're always watching what's going on with the school, because our resources are limited. There's only so much cash we have. So look, it's a critically important project. I think it's something we'll be proud of. We got to watch it very, very closely. And as we go through our budget reviews, always keep our eye on that in terms of how it's going. And I probably would request that John Cummings, probably a couple, once or twice, during the upcoming budget process, at least give us a brief update. And Maya, obviously you too, let us know where we're on the construction side. So I'm a little sensitive to time. And
George, first of all, let me say thank you very much for letting us come. And anytime you want us, we're here. And I do want to point out that the ARPA funds, there's unrestricted and restricted funds. This is from the restricted funds.
Right.
That we had to go through Norfolk County, and they were really gracious working with us. And this will be applied directly to our HVAC system because it was designed and will be put in unbelievably well.
Yeah, and John, that was my point. It wasn't free cash. It had to be tied to something we could justify use of the ARPA.
Correct.
But look, I would also like to thank Maya, you Cumming, and John Cumming, and the members of the school committee. I've seen Charlie, I've seen Tony, and Maya, you're also on the school committee. I'd also like to, Abby, boy, did I learn a lot about the challenges you have confronting you. And I think that's something, keep us in the loop, make sure we're aware of it. And I know, Emily, you got some challenges, but you've got to negotiate your contracts confidentially. So we'll leave those questions as is. But I just want to thank you all so very much. And I think we are going to move on to other items on our agenda.
Excellent. Thank you. Good
Thank
luck,
you for
everyone.
having us.
So much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
I
you
want to
for
acknowledge
everything.
that Dory Parmalee from the school committee is here too.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, Dory, didn't say hello before.
I'm sorry,
No
Dory,
problem.
I missed you. That reminds me,
Thanks so much.
Chris, are there any questions from the public? I got to be careful on this. Did we see any questions come in?
There are no outstanding Q&As, George.
All right, excellent. So at least we've offered that. All right, so I'll stay with the FinCom. We probably got about 10 more minutes of work and we'll be done, okay?
Yes,
So non-FinCom members, go enjoy the rest of your evening.
yes.
Thanks. Good night.
Okay, if I can move along, let me just take a look here. On terms of the my update, I think I pretty much told you that we are going to have a separate capital budget group this year because I want to look at the capital budget holistically. And I think it will give members of the Finance Commission on that committee the ability to directly meet with the town manager and department heads to make sure we are comfortable with the recommendations the town is making for capital items. I also want to make sure we have a role in long-range financial planning. At the end of the day, it's finance commissions need to be involved in long-range financial planning, and we just have to deal with the restrictions of the charter right now. And then I want you to start thinking about committees you would like to work on. The one thing we have formalized, at least Chris and I are making a recommendation, we're breaking municipal into two components. It's going to be a public safety component, which is police, fire, and DPW. And then there'll be another component dealing with human services and other municipal administration. So I think it'll give everybody a chance who wants to get involved in some side of municipal government to be involved. Obviously, we'll do schools too. So think about what committees you would like to be on and just send a note to Victoria letting her know. And then Chris and I will probably talk to several of you, try and tap you on the shoulders to chair some of these respective committees. On new business you have a memo from Dottie. It clarifies what is considered to be absent remote participation. It's not Zoom. That is, if you need to be out of town, and they've really made the criteria much easy. If you have a reasonable excuse why you cannot attend a meeting, just make sure you get a request to Victoria. Okay, she has to sign off on it. I have to sign it. I have to get to Dottie within a certain period before town meeting. But look, but if you have a family emergency, if you have to travel on business, we will try and accommodate you, okay? You really only can participate by phone, okay? And hopefully most of the rooms will be able to accommodate you. Chris, any other comments on that in terms of the remote participation?
No, do you want to mention the letter that we received?
Oh, yes. You have a copy of a letter we received from a town resident on questions she asked the fire about the fire department, and you also have Chief Decker's response. Okay, it did not come up tonight. I wanted you to see it. Anytime we get information from a citizen, we will make it available to you. I think that's something that our public safety group needs to take a very, very careful look at. And there's an example where we, as the FinCom, need to be involved in discussions with the town in terms of how they're going to solve this problem. Okay. All right. I guess on old business, unless, well, is there any other new business anybody would like to bring up? Okay. Old business. Have you had a chance to look at the minutes from September 8th? And if you have, and do anybody have any questions on them? Okay, can I get a motion to approve those minutes?
I move to approve the minutes of September the 8th.
May I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. And I know that we have to do a roll call, so I will ask Victoria to do a roll call approving the minutes of September 8th.
Bill Bruce,
Yes.
John Kerry,
Yes.
Jim Ferrero,
Yeah, I was late to that meeting, so I abstain.
Fine.
Rennie Gauthier,
Yes.
Mike Gay.
Mike had a drop off.
Okay.
He's in Edmonton, Canada, so.
Angela Hughes,
I wasn't in attendance, abstain.
But we can hear you.
I have a headset on. I had to figure something out.
Keelan Jersak,
Yeah, I don't believe I was there as well, so I'll abstain.
George Lehem,
Yes.
George Maroon,
Yes, for the portion I was there, I was late.
That's okay.
and Christina.
Was that Christina?
Yeah, is she here?
She was
She
at
is.
one point. I think she dropped off.
Okay.
Okay. Sean Weller
Yes.
and Alex Yale.
I abstain. I was not in attendance.
Okay. Do we have any
Forum?
questions? Oops.
Yes.
Sorry, Chris.
I vote yes.
Okay. Do we have any questions of the public or press? None? Okay, how about a motion to adjourn?
I have a quick, before we move to adjourn, please, one quick request.
Yes.
That we consider a deadline for materials. We can't get torpedoed with 20-page decks an hour before the meeting. There has to be a deadline for the meeting, and then anything that's after the deadline has to be for business for the following meeting.
George, I understand it. We did, the school committee, the school side got their stuff to us early. We politely request that the select board get their information to us. At the end of the day, they have a certain amount of flexibility. I try and get the moment we get the information, we distribute to it. I understand your concern, but I at least want to get the information into your hands, okay?
Well, I mean, if we're going to deliberate on the materials, we have to have time to, digest them, right?
Most of the time you do. This is more of a presentation or an update, okay? And a lot of times you will go into meetings when the presentations will be made. We won't even see the material ahead of time. It'll actually be presented to us during the meeting.
Well, maybe I would just ask to consider changing that practice.
Okay, thank you for the comment. Okay, so did we motion to adjourn? All set?
I move to adjourn.
Can I get a
Second.
Second.
Okay, I'm going to do something very interesting. Raise your hands if you want to adjourn. It's been a long night. Okay. And I'm going to take the option of saying thank you very much. Okay. And I will try, hopefully we'll be able to meet in person next time. If any of you have any questions or concerns, you can go to Mr. Chris Pareto, or you can go to me and think about the committees you'd like to serve on. Okay.
George, to that end, are we going to circulate, or have we, and I missed it, a updated list of contact information?
Very good point. Okay, why do we do this? Victoria, if you have a list, why don't you send it out and ask FinCom members to give you any edits or changes to their contact information, okay? It's primarily your email and your phone number, correct? That's what we want. Jim, that's basically what we were looking for, correct?
Yeah, I think that's all we need.
Yeah. That's a very, very good idea. We'll get that out, give you a chance to edit it and get it back to us, okay? All right.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah,
I hope
thank
we-
you. Good
Thank you.
night.
Hope we get
Good
to
night,
meet
all.
in person next month, but if not, we'll do our Zoom, okay? Okay, be safe, everybody.